Hello, it's Scott Manley, and I finally have something to show for all my efforts. I have an honest-to-God, fully functional Eve landing and return mission. Now, the only thing I'm doing weird here is, okay, I have mechanical jeb, that's the only mod I'm using, everything else is stock. The stats on this is there are 866 parts, the launch mass is something like 1,250 tons. And to actually get the physics engine to operate in a reasonable way, I'm using Cheat Engine to slow down the game clock to 1/5 of normal speed. Now, apparently someone's got a mod for this. There's the Omega mod or something. I haven't been able to track it down. But I did it with Cheat Engine. That means that this first whole launch sequence actually ran 1/5 of the speed. It took me 20 minutes to get this thing into orbit. But I did get into orbit in the end. It wasn't like where you run it without this, it would run at 1 frame per second and would be uncontrollable. Someone in another video commented that NASA does not have to deal with their control systems running at 1 frame per second. And actually, I recall that there is an interesting case where NASA did have to deal with low frame rate video and almost lost a spacecraft as a result. During STS-27, it was a military mission, so operational security was a big thing. Well, during launch, it actually got hit by a chunk of foam from the external tank, and it suffered severe tile damage. And when the astronauts hung the camera over the side to look at the tiles, they were like freaking out because they actually saw tiles missing and they saw exposed structure. Now, they talk to mission control and they want to send photo, but of course the mission operators say, no, it has to be encrypted video. Now the thing about the encrypted video is it would take a picture, encrypt it and beam it down, and they would get 1 frame every 3 seconds. So the engineers looked at this video coming back at, 1/3 of a frame per second, and they just thought, oh, that's not damage, that's just shadows and light. You guys are okay to land. When it finally did land, parts of it had melted, but it did land safely. STS-27 Atlantis was the worst the most damaged space shuttle to return to Earth in one piece. But yeah, as you see, this is working relatively well. The only thing is I've pretty much abandoned mechanical jab. I've switched it to using just kill rotation because I found that for some reason it would just decide to wander off the vector that I was trying to point at. So I'm more or less flying this by hand. I've cut the thrust a little off the peak because I'm really terrified that what will happen is there'll be some structural failure and everything will pile forward. So I could probably get into fuel and into orbit with more fuel if it wasn't for that particular fear. But nevertheless, we're getting there. We're well on our way to being at orbital velocity. 43 kilometers up, 1,700 meters per second, and we're getting ready to drop that second stage. And you'll notice in the first stage we had a bunch of Sepatrons to keep everything clear. And yeah, this stage we're going to have a bunch of Sepatrons fire as well. Let's see this in just a few seconds' time. I'm just going to hold it still, reduce the rotation, and bang, there they go. Although, it's kind of cool that they still broke each other and bits fly off in all sorts of directions. Again, remember, I watched this at 1/5 normal speed. I was able to drink practically my whole cup of tea during this ascent. It was a very slow and tedious experience, but it is not the slowest and most tedious experience in this mission. So yeah, now my ascent pattern has given me a lot of vertical velocity. My time to apoapsis is very high. So what I've done is I just kind of cut the thrust back to an absolute bare minimum to make sure I can keep it pointed in the right direction. Because what I want to do is bring that time to apoapsis down. Otherwise, if it's too high, then I will get into a much higher orbit than I want. I want to go into as low a orbit as possible because lower orbits are more efficient in terms of escape trajectories. If you're burning to escape Kerbin's sphere of influence and go somewhere, you actually want to start from as low an orbit as possible, paradoxically. Or you want your parking orbit to be as low as possible. Ideally, you want to be as high as an orbit as possible, but if you're starting from the surface and you're parking somewhere, get as low as you can, and then you can take full advantage of the world-famous Oberth effect to get you out there with the most efficiency. So yeah, as you see, I'm just keeping this thing pointed, trying to bring this time to apoapse down. But at this point, if I just circularize at this altitude, I will be set. Now I'm trying to keep as much fuel in this stock as possible because I want to then use that for my injection burn. The spacecraft should be able to do a lot of injection maneuvers using just the nuclear rocket on board, but the nuclear rocket has really lousy thrust-to-weight ratio. This vehicle itself has a thrust-to-weight ratio of 1.06. So yeah, what I've done, switched away to another vehicle, set my phase angles up. That's 60 days already on the clock, and now we're just going to burn off. Now, I kind of delayed my burn a little too much, I think, because I was worried about encountering the moon on the way out, and that actually causes trouble later. But yeah, you see, we're running this at about 50% thrust. Again, I'm absolutely terrified that one of these things will break, but it doesn't. And we continue, we switch over to the nuclear rocket, which has 1/20th of a G acceleration. So this is where you really want the time acceleration. I had to fly this all in more or less real time. Of course, I was doing other things and paying attention in my own way, but you don't want to watch this in real time. So yeah, there we are. We're coming out. We've got our orbit vectors coming in down towards Eve's orbit. You see that because I delayed my escape vector a little, I have an apoapse that's going to be a little further out, and that's actually going to delay my orbit a little. That was unfortunate, and ultimately it results in me missing this window. For all my effort in setting up phase angles, I ruin everything by not getting my escape angle set up right. Again, interesting thing to notice also is that despite running at full thrust, my orbital velocity is actually dropping because the planet's gravity is more significant than the engine thrust, even though I'm traveling out of its gravity well at some severe speed here. But yeah, so you notice the clock now is 658. I really screwed up and had to orbit several more times before I managed to put myself in a position where I could have an encounter. And then, yeah, swung by Eve just enough to put myself onto a capture orbit, because what I want to do is then select this plateau, which somebody pointed out resembles Mount Look at That from the Larry Niven's Known Space series. So yeah, using a combination of the landing computer and the landing autopilot, I dropped myself right onto that. And yeah, this is the bit you've already seen. We're just going to drop through the atmosphere, watch these G-forces go up to insane levels. Redlining all the way. I don't know if I can do this in future versions. That's probably one of the things they will be adding soon. It would be a very easy thing for them to add soon, and it would ruin almost every rocket design I've flown. Yep, pop out the parachutes, and again we're going to wait until we get our altitude. Our true altitude has to drop down to 1 kilometer, and then we're going to do a maximum thrust burn for a few seconds to drop our vertical velocity sufficiently that we aren't getting torn apart. There we go. 1.4, 3, 2, 1, thrust! There we go. We just slightly more than 1 G, or 1 Evian G. Yes, Evian. They have water. Evian water. No, never mind. And then we're going to wait until about 40 meters before we actually hit the land button. We've set our touchdown speed to 3 meters per second, and we're dropping onto the surface. And beautiful. And again, I forgot to include a ladder, so this will entirely be a propaganda trip. The astronaut cannot, in fact, get out and stretch his legs. He's been in there for 700 days. And yes, that was a nice big scary bang, but it does not in fact damage the spacecraft. We were just ditching the parachutes there. And now it's up to Mechanical Jeb to guide us back into orbit. There's a lot of staging going on and it's actually quite complicated. Oh yes, and that is some weird crazy noise that comes over when we did the time acceleration. Oh, please ignore that. Ouch, ouch, ouch. It is burning my ears. And so, I mean, we've seen this point. We know how this point goes. We can get up into orbit. We're just going to kind of time accelerate through that. You notice at this altitude, we've already got the nuclear rocket running at full efficiency. It, however, does not have enough thrust to overcome the gravity of Eve, so you've got to make sure it gets high enough up that it's going to continue to go. It has to have plenty of momentum. It'll just be mainly used for circularizing the orbit. Oh, what's it saying? Total delta V expended 5 kilometers per second. I wonder what this will come out as. Somebody said 10 kilometers per second, but I think that's if you go right to the surface. There, 7 kilometers per second. There we go. It wouldn't be any more than 8. That's not so bad, actually. But again, we've got to point out, this is only a one-man vehicle. Just wait and try until we try to land a 3-man vehicle. Oh my goodness. I am done with this Eve. I don't really want to put a 3-man rocket on the surface without using cheating parts. So yeah, now we have plenty of fuel, so we set ourselves on a homeward trip. We, of course, to time accelerate from a 200-kilometer orbit, it's good to switch back to another spacecraft and do the time acceleration so you can then switch back to your vehicle. That's why it's kind of good to have a space probe landed on the surface like I do. The space probe was a Mechanical Jeb, and it can do all the time accelerating for me. It doesn't mind that it gets dizzy from the planet spinning really fast in its accelerated reality state. And there we go. Look at that. And so we come back in and, well, I guess we get a Kerbal encounter. We also get a moon encounter. What I really want to do, given that I've got a whole fuel tank left, is just kind of get myself into a nice position that I can actually perform a powered landing at my location of choice. Because it would be really nice to land right on top of KSC's doorstep. But yeah, whatever we do, we end up flipping around the moon quite a bit. It's very nice to watch the orbits kind of dance around like that. But there we go, that's a nice orbit, isn't it? And from that, I pretty much hit the land at KSC button. And we get home, beautifully drop it onto its tail. And then all the local engineers say, what the hell are you doing? That's a nuclear rocket that you've just been irradiating the space center with. Anyway, I'm Scott Manley. This has been a long day. Fly safe.